Thank you, Chairman. I'm making this presentation on behalf of my colleague, Ilias Kyriazakis, who sends his apologies that he can't be here today. The purpose of the presentation is to give you some background about the ProHealth project. So I will tell you what the project is, give you some overview of the different types of work we are doing in the project, where you can find some information about the results. But in this presentation, I won't actually give you any results, because those will come in the presentations which will follow in more detail about the different aspects of the work. So ProHealth is a 5-year project funded by the EU. It began at the end of 2013 and it continues until the end of next year. In total, the funding for the project is 12 million euros. 9 million of that comes from the EU. The rest comes from contributions by the industrial and the scientific partners. You might think 12 million sounds like a lot of money. When you divide that by 5 years and then by 22 different partners in the consortium, it's perhaps not quite so generous. But our consortium is a mix of partners from academic institutions, but equally from the industry. So we are very balanced in both the basic science, but also the application of that science through into real practice. Our partnership has very good coverage across Europe. We have 11 different countries represented, and you can see we go from the north to the south, from the east to the west. So we hope we will deal with the issues which are important in all the different geographic regions. Here is some of our team. This was at our consortium meeting here in Spain, in Segovia. Those of you with very good eyesight might see some familiar faces from our 2 Spanish partners, PIGCHAMP and Coron. What are we trying to do in this project? Our official objective is to get a better understanding of the diseases of animals which are linked to the intensification of production. Not just to get that understanding, but to then use that understanding to try to develop, evaluate, and tell people about control strategies which could be used for these so-called production diseases. What are production diseases? We define them as the diseases which tend to persist in intensive production systems and those whose prevalence or severity gets worse the higher the production level gets. So as we improve our production, these are the diseases which are posing us greater and greater challenges. Why are they important? I think it's probably obvious to everybody in this room why they're important. These are the diseases that have a very big impact all around the world on the profitability of production, but also because of their effects on efficiency, they have an impact on challenges to the environment from livestock production. They also have an impact on the quality of the products that we produce and market. Of increasing importance is also the fact that these diseases are probably the major reason for using antibiotics in livestock production. And as we have more and more pressure to reduce the use of antibiotics, understanding and controlling these diseases in other ways is a very great priority. I think every country in the EU has the objective of sustainable intensification of livestock production and increased food security. And production diseases, I think, are the greatest threat to these two things. What What sort of diseases are we talking about? Well, there are a big range of them. There are the metabolic diseases, which arise as animals are being asked to be more and more productive, to grow faster, to use feed more efficiently, to produce more offspring. That imposes much more stress on the physiological systems, and diseases start to creep in. We see locomotory and skeletal problems, things like osteochondrosis or kyphosis, like the pig in this picture. We also have respiratory diseases. We heard a lot about these in Dominic's presentation earlier, the complex respiratory disease mix that we see now, particularly in grow-finished pigs. We also have enteric diseases. In pigs particularly, we focus on post-weaning diarrhea. In poultry, which are also in our project, necrotic enteritis is a big problem. Last but not least, we also call neonatal mortality a production disease, and I'll explain why that is in my next talk. If we look in the past at how people approached production diseases, they tended to be quite specific in the questions they were asking. So they would explore different pathogenicity of the disease agent, or they would explore differences between different animals in their genetic susceptibility to some of these problems. But I think we all know that's rather simplistic, because in most cases, as Dominic illustrated for respiratory disease, there are a lot of different interacting factors which determine how bad the symptoms of those diseases turn out to be on the farm. We can illustrate this by this very simple example. This is a graph of post-weaning diarrhea in weaned piglets. Here are two groups of piglets with the same genetics, the same farrowing house background, and subject to exactly the same level of disease challenge after weaning. But you can see that something as simple as the variability of the temperature in the nursery environment can have a marked influence on how much diarrhea those pigs then express. So just looking at genetic susceptibility or just looking at E. coli pathogenicity wouldn't explain these sorts of differences. And in fact, what we know is that when we talk about production diseases, we really have to think about three different things all the time which are going to interact. One is the pathogen, the second one is the animal, and the third one is the environment. And within each of those categories, there are a range of other things we need to consider. So in the case of the pathogen, for example, we can consider how much is there and how virulent that strain is. And we can think about how biosecurity or hygiene might minimize the amount the animals experience. If we think about the animal, we can think about genetic predisposition. We can think about how that might be modified by the experience the animal has early in life. The example of colostrum was given by Dominic. And those things will interact to determine how resistant the animal is to the disease challenge, or how well it can tolerate that challenge if it comes. But we can also influence that by previous experience to that pathogen, either because it's naturally experienced or increasingly in our health management strategies now by vaccination. If we turn to the environment, again, we know there are a range of things which are going to affect the disease expression. Those things can come from the nutrition of the animal, from a number of different management factors, or from environmental stresses. And all of those can, through influencing the physiology of that animal, change its ability to resist or tolerate the disease. So, against that background, what are we trying to do in this project? We have a number of different objectives. First of all, we want to get a better impression across the EU about the extent and the risk factors for different production diseases in both pigs and in poultry. Particularly, we're dealing with broiler chickens, but I won't say very much about that today at this meeting. We want to try and understand at a basic scientific level how those diseases act, and that can go to the level of detail of the individual molecules involved in the process, the cells, or up to the level of the whole animal. We want to understand more about how the genetics of the animal influence disease susceptibility and how that might be modified by the early life experience. We want to understand more about how the environment in which we keep the animal influences the development of the disease or the persistence of the disease. And we want to use all that knowledge to then try to come up with interventions which we can apply on practical farms to better control those production diseases. And at the end of the day, we have to consider the wider aspects, in particular what society as a whole thinks about how we want to manage these diseases, but also, very importantly, what are the economics of managing these diseases for the individual producers. So, those objectives are packaged together in a framework which looks a little bit like this. Each of those boxes is a particular package of work within the overall project. So we have evaluation of different risk factors. We have particular lines of investigation into neonatal life, environmental influences, and genetics. We are looking at a more deep scientific level at the microbiology and immunology underlying the diseases, and using that knowledge to try and come up with reduction strategies. At each stage of that process, looking carefully at the socioeconomic implications. So a little more detail in what's in each of these packages. And these are the things you'll be hearing about over the next 4 or 5 talks in this meeting. The first work package is the one you've heard quite a lot about already. This is the one where we've been using surveys across the EU to try and assess the current situation of production diseases, their effects on health and welfare and performance in both pigs and poultry. And at the same time, to get a better understanding of the biosecurity and the management practices which are happening in these different countries. Those results you heard from Dominic in his presentation earlier. And as Dominic said, the next step is then to use that information that we've gathered to start to try and understand the relationship between the different risk and protective factors out on farm and the expression and severity of the different types of production disease. You can see in the lighter text, we're also doing the same thing in the poultry industry. So that's work package 1, and you've heard quite a lot about that already. The second work package is about neonatal survival. And here we're interested in what is the role of the management of the sow and the genetics of the sow on piglet viability, piglet survival, and longer-term health. We also have a small piece of work looking to see whether we might find innovative ways of making better nurse sows. And I'll tell you some more about the early results from this work package in my next talk. The third work package is focused more on the interactions of genetics and health. In this work package, again, we have a mixture of approaches, looking at detailed review of the existing literature to see what we can learn, carrying out specific experiments, looking at differences in genetic susceptibility to production disease, and also some particular focus on the leg problems we see in both pigs and poultry in the highly selected lines. And you'll hear some results from this work package in the last talk today by Nathalie Lefloc from INRA in France. This work package is also doing other jobs in the project. It's delivering data to our colleagues who are doing economic modelling about the consequence of these diseases. And it's delivering tissues to our molecular colleagues who are then looking at what characterises individual animals and their response. The fourth work package looks at the environmental influences on these diseases. So, at the beginning, it was necessary to start to make a protocol to describe the environment in a meaningful and repeatable way. Having got that protocol, there's then a major data gathering exercise on a number of commercial farms across Europe to start to see how much differences and changes in environmental characteristics are linked to how these production diseases are expressed. And you'll hear more about that tomorrow morning from Carlos Pinheiro of PigChat. It's not just the physical and climatic environment we're interested in, we're also interested in the microbial environment. And we've been gathering a lot of data on what microbes are present on the farm and on how they're affecting disease expression. Ultimately, from this work package, we're also planning to develop a new IT system to better automate the capture of the sort of data which producers want to help their environmental management. And again, I'm sure Carlos will tell you about that tomorrow. Our fifth work package you might describe as the high science work package. Here we're looking at the molecular level, at what happens within the tissues of the animals when they are affected by production diseases. Why it is that some genetics are better able to resist those diseases than others. And also how things like the microbes in the gut can be protective or a risk factor. These things you'll hear about in two presentations tomorrow from Neil Foster and Ivan Ripp. Again, why do we want this very basic information? We want it in order to make practical use of it. If we understand these things better, we have the possibility of developing better diagnostics for these production diseases, or to see new ways in which we might change their diet or their management to get better disease control. Once we've done all that, and we have a better understanding, we have some ideas about what intervention strategies might be beneficial, then we come to the interesting stage of the project, which takes some of those ideas out onto practical farms and test them. And that's something going on at the present time, so there won't be any results to report yet. But again, when we get these results, this is a very useful source of data on the economics. What impact are these different diseases having on production performance? What are the costs of applying interventions? And what is the return on investment of some of those interventions? This is where our next work package comes in. This is the work package looking at the socioeconomics of production diseases. And you could say there are two aspects of this. There's the social aspect and there's the economic aspect. The social aspect is asking questions about how the outside world might see these diseases and the interventions we employ. What are the influences on animal welfare? Are there ethical issues for society as a whole? The economic evaluation, of course, is self-evident. We want to know about the impacts on production efficiency and costs on the farm. When we have our interventions, it's very important for us to know whether those interventions are going to be acceptable to people outside of farming. We had our solution in the past in antibiotics. That plainly was acceptable then, but is not acceptable now. We want to be sure that interventions we now develop are things which are going to be acceptable in the longer term. And last but not least, in our final work package, when we have all this information, we have to tell people about it. And there are a lot of different people who we would like to try and keep informed of what we're doing. They may be people in the scientific community, but I think more importantly, people out there in the field, the veterinarians, the farmers, the people working in allied industries. We also, because we are receiving a lot of money from the EU, have to consider the policy makers, both at national level and at EU level, because they are also very concerned about animal health, animal welfare, use of antibiotics, and we have to give them guidance on what might be sensible ways forward in policy terms. And we also have to try and inform the wider society about these things. There are many uninformed views if you go on to social media, and I think one of the jobs of EU projects like ours is to try to give some objective information to inform these various debates. When we have interventions, again, we need not just to communicate information about the problems, but also information about possible solutions. So where are we? Well, as you saw, we're nearing the end of this project. It's a 5-year project and we are just at the end of the 4th year. So a lot of the experimental studies have been completed, and those are the things you're going to hear about in the coming talks. What we're doing at the moment is we're doing some of the final laboratory analyses of the materials from those studies. We are starting to do the economic evaluations from those studies. And we have put out into the field some intervention strategies which are currently under test. Final results of those will probably not come until the middle of next year because we need large numbers of animals through these to get convincing results. By the end of next year, what have we got to deliver for all the money we've had from the EU? They would like us to deliver a better understanding of the different factors involved in production diseases. They would like us to deliver some multifactorial control strategies. They would like us to be clear about the economic cost benefits of those things and the social acceptability of those things. And ultimately, they would like our work to result in a more competitive and more resilient pig and poultry sector within the EU. If you want to know more about the project, you can go to the website, which is on this slide. On this website, you will find the detailed reports of the work which is already completed. You'll also find our project newsletter, which comes out twice a year with short, accessible summaries of what we've been doing. And as new results come in, they'll be added to this library and available. You can also find other material like videos, multimedia, or links into other materials. So I should like to finish there. I'd be very happy to answer any general questions about the project. If you have questions that relate to the specific scientific work we're doing in the project, I would suggest you save those for the speakers who are coming after me and who will give you a lot more detail of actually what we've done and the results we've obtained. Thank you very much.